only thing we have to fear is
in war,
fear itself.
there is no substitute for victory.
Let us never negotiate out of fear.
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting hand in hand for the liberty we've earned, for glory and honor, for our sons and daughters, ever mindful of the lessons we've learned. Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome to the intersection of faith and politics. This is WallBuilders Live with David Barton and Rick Green. You can visit our websites at wallbuilderslive.com and wallbuilders.com. Today we're bringing you a special program from David Barton on the principles of limited government. Actually, a presentation that he did. And you can actually get it at our website, wallbuilders.com today, if you'd like a CD of it. Today will be the first part in a three-part series. So if you're going to miss, for some reason, the live show tomorrow or the next day, you can get them at our website, wallbuilderslive.com, and download all three when it's all said and done. But we'll get started with that today from David. This is one of the most popular topics that he has been speaking on. So many people wanting to know, what does it mean to have a limited government? Is that just money, or is that also jurisdiction? And how do you get a limited government? How do you rein in an out-of-control government? And what would it look like if we did this thing the right way, or certainly the way that our founding fathers envisioned that it would be done? Here's David Barton on the principles of limited government.
Government. Good government. Now, what is it that makes good government? Why is government sometimes good, sometimes bad? Why is there so much discussion, debate over it? And particularly when people start throwing around phrases like limited government. What does that mean? What does it mean to have limited government? And is having a limited government good or bad? Well, the founding fathers who produced the most successful government in the history of the world have been very clear in their writings about what they consider to be the basis of good government. What is limited government, and is that good or bad? They answer all those questions. So we're going to cover those questions, but let me begin by first going to a very famous and very prominent founding father. His name is George Mason. Now, George Mason was one of the 55 individuals at the Constitutional Convention who framed the U.S. Constitution. As a matter of fact, he is responsible for what we call the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. He's actually titled the father of the Bill of Rights. He had a great grasp of government, and he made a declaration concerning government that was so significant that it was included in the original 1776 Constitution of Virginia. Now, that declaration still is in the Virginia Constitution today, several constitutions later. It was originally there in 1776, and the principle is so good that it's remained across the centuries. And here's what he said: "No free government, nor the blessings of liberty, can be preserved to any people but by a frequent recurrence to fundamental principles." In other words, the only way you keep free government and the blessings of liberty is to keep going back, to frequently recur to fundamental principles. Now, we're going to look at the fundamental principles of good government. And in doing that, let's just first recognize the fact that America is a very blessed nation. As you look at where we've been past 2 centuries under the documents we have, we are the most successful government in the history of the world. I mean, quite literally, well over 2 centuries under the same piece of paper, the Declaration, the Constitution. No other nation has come close to that. If you look at nations like Brazil, they've had 8 constitutions since 1822. You take the 20th century alone, my goodness, Afghanistan had 5 constitutions in the 20th century. Poland had 7 since 1921. Russia had 4 since 1917. I mean, just nation after nation. There are around 200 nations at the United Nations. It goes up and down every year depending on who's conquered whom and who's absorbed who and who's had a revolution. But generally speaking, of all the nations that are there, America is the only nation in the world that does not average a revolution every 30 to 40 years. That's something we take for granted. We just think national stability is normal. It is not normal. Other nations wish they had the stability we had. Now, that stability was already very visible even 50 years after the American Revolution. And one of the foreign observers who came to America in the 1830s and wrote about what he saw in America was Alexis de Tocqueville. He did the famous book called Democracy in America. And having looked at America, and here's America 50 years after our revolution, we still have our first government. In his country, 50 years later, they've had several revolutions. And he looked at America, and this is what he said about America. He said, "The position of the Americans is quite exceptional, and it may be believed that no democratic people will ever be placed in a similar position. Now, he says the position of the Americans is exceptional, and probably no one will ever have that same exceptional position. This is where the term has been derived. It's called American exceptionalism. American exceptionalism is not a term of cockiness, or it's not a braggadocious type term where we're saying, look at us, we're exceptional. It's just a statement of the stability that America's had, and that was a title given us by Alexis de Tocqueville back in the 1830s. So when you look at American exceptionalism, there's no question that we're different from other nations. There's been a lot of push in recent years through all sorts of channels to make America more global friendly. We want all of our allies to like us. We want our enemies to like us. We want everyone to like us. As a matter of fact, the Supreme Court decides that it needs to have the world like us, so we're going to start quoting precedent from the world to interpret our Constitution. And in a number of cases, there have been foreign precedents quoted to justify overturning American policies because the rest of the world doesn't do it that way. And my goodness, Europe, that's the oldest part of the Western world, so let's be like Europe. Well, 200 years ago, when that philosophy was being advocated, we were smart enough to recognize at that time that that's really not where we want to be. I mean, you take a nation like Denmark with a 68% tax rate. Do we really want to be like Europe? You look at a nation like France, who's had such instability, 15 different constitutions since we've had our one. Do we really want what Europe has? And 200 years ago, we looked at that and said, no, we really don't. There's a great statement from Thomas Jefferson, and this is what he declared 2 centuries ago. He said, the comparisons of our governments with those of Europe are like a comparison of heaven and hell. In other words, back then we recognized that there's something distinctly different about America that makes us different. We have a different set of ideas. As a matter of fact, our ideas stem from God. And I love what George Washington said. This is his declaration. In having overseen the formation of the nation, having fought for our freedom and independence, and having secured it, and having helped write the Constitution, presided over the Convention, and then presided over the formation of the Bill of Rights, which is the capstone of the Constitution, this is what he said. The hand of providence has been so conspicuous in all this that he must be worse than an infidel that lacks faith, and more than wicked that hath not gratitude enough to acknowledge his obligations. In other words, if you can look at this and you don't see the hand of God in this, you've got to be worse than an infidel that has no faith at all. You've got to be more than wicked if you can't see God's role in this. And that's what they believed. And they believed that they had created a philosophy of government that was different from other nations. It was not a secular philosophy of government. It was one built on universal principles that God had set forth thousands of years earlier in His Scriptures when He helped establish the first government of His people, Israel, a very successful government. So we saw that, and that's what produced American exceptionalism. Now, we have American exceptionalism. That's just a statement of fact. Again, that's not any type of a haughty attitude. But what is the specific philosophy that produced American exceptionalism?
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. Today, we heard that our founding fathers were largely atheists, agnostics, or deists. The writings of founding father Richard Henry Lee strongly refute that assertion. Richard Henry Lee was a signer of the Declaration of Independence, and he is specifically the man who made the motion in Congress that America separate from Great Britain. Following his death, his papers and correspondence, including numerous original handwritten letters from other prominent founding fathers, were passed on to his grandson. After having studied those letters, this was how the grandson described our founding fathers. He declared, "The wise and great men of those days were not ashamed publicly to confess the name of our blessed Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. In behalf of the people, as their representatives and rulers, they acknowledged the sublime doctrine of His mediation."
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
If you go back to our original national document, our original founding document, the Declaration of Independence, in the first 46 words in that primary opening statement in the Declaration, they tell us the philosophy of government that has produced American exceptionalism. Let me just read you that opening statement. They say, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men." Now you take those 46 words, That is the philosophy of government, and 2 points immediately become clear in that opening statement of our first national government document. Number one, they say there is a divine creator, and number two, the divine creator gives guaranteed rights to men. So that's our philosophy. There's a God, and God gives specific rights to men. Now that's the philosophy of government, but what is the purpose of government? The purpose is different from the philosophy, but the purpose is also set forth in those first 46 words. Again, returning to those 46 words, the founder said, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." That's point 1 and point 2. There is a God. He gives specific inalienable rights. But here's the purpose of government. The very next sentence they say that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. So very simply, the purpose of government is to secure God-given or inalienable rights to man. Now, when you look at inalienable rights, that's a term we don't use very often today, but what is an inalienable right? Well, the founders who use that term define that term. A great example is James Wilson. James Wilson is one of only 6 founding fathers who signed both the Constitution and the Declaration. James Wilson was appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court as an original justice by President George Washington, and James Wilson is the man who started the first organized legal training in America. As a matter of fact, when he was sitting on the U.S. Supreme Court, he was also teaching law school, teaching the first set of law books done for any students in America. So here's a guy who certainly knows constitutional intent. He certainly knows the founding intent, those 46 words, because he signed both the Declaration and the Constitution, and now he's on the court to help interpret that and make sure everyone knows what they intended. This is what he said in those legal writings that he taught students. He said this is an inalienable right. He says an inalienable right is a right to which we are entitled by our all-wise and all-beneficent Creator. Now again, he said, an inalienable right is a right to which we're entitled by our all-wise and all-beneficent Creator. So, very simply, an inalienable right is a right that God gave you, not government. If God told you you have the right to do something, that's a right that comes from God, not from government. That's an inalienable right. John Dickinson, who's also a signer of the Constitution, who very closely involved in the independence of America, was a general in the Revolution, was a governor in Delaware and Pennsylvania after the Revolution. This is what he said about an inalienable right. He said, an inalienable right is a right which God gave to you and which no inferior power has a right to take away. In other words, it's a right that God gave you, and nothing less than God can take that right away from you. Well, that's an inalienable right. Very simply, an inalienable right are rights that God has given to man, and the purpose of government is to protect what would be included in inalienable rights. What can we point to and say, hey, God gave these rights to man? Well, they listed some in the Declaration, that's for sure. And when you look at the writings of Samuel Adams, a signer of the Declaration, and actually Sam Adams is called the father of American independence, when he talked about the inalienable rights, he put a priority on them. He says, first, there's a right to life. Secondly, to liberty, and thirdly, to property. Now we say, no, wait a minute. The Declaration says life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. How did they get property out of that? Well, all the legal commentaries back then equated property with the pursuit of happiness. Today we say the great American dream is to own a home. Well, that's property. You see, the pursuit of happiness, the pursuit of that American dream is the ability, as they stated it, to acquire, to possess, to enjoy, and to preserve private property. So that's the pursuit of happiness, is to be able to own your own things, to be able to purchase and acquire and have your own things, whether that be transportation or housing or any of the things that we have. That's property, and that's a God-given inalienable right that God has given. As a matter of fact, that's why one of the first 10 commandments says, don't steal. Don't take someone else's private property. God does not want private property being violated. The 10th commandment, the 10 commandments actually says, don't even covet someone else's private property. So that's a God-given right, the right to own property, and that's why Sam Adams says number 1 is the right to life, number 2 is to liberty, and third is the right to property. Now, as we develop the government and we take that philosophy, those 46 words, and we incorporate it into the Constitution, and as we finish the Constitution, we come with the Bill of Rights, which again is the capstone of the Constitution, and they said, we're going to name some other inalienable rights just to make sure that government does not get into these rights, and that's the Bill of Rights. When you look at the 10 Amendments of the Bill of Rights, those are God-granted rights that government is not to intrude into. The right of religious expression in the First Amendment, the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms, what they call the biblical right of self-defense, the Third Amendment, sanctity of the home, and you work through all the amendments, the Fifth Amendment, the right to private property. I mean, those are rights that are inalienable rights. So inalienable rights are listed in the Declaration of Independence and in the Bill of Rights.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. How should we respond if confronted with frustration and conflict? The proper response was given over 200 years ago in a lengthy speech when Benjamin Franklin told the delegates at the Constitutional Convention, "In this situation of this assembly, groping as it were in the dark to find political truth, how has it happened, sir, that we have not hitherto once thought of humbly applying to the Father of lights to illuminate our understanding? Have we now forgotten that powerful friend? Or do we imagine we no longer need His assistance? God governs in the affairs of men. I therefore move that henceforth prayers imploring the assistance of heaven and its blessings on our deliberations be held in this assembly every morning before we proceed to business." Benjamin Franklin knew that prayer was the proper response.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Going back to what Sam Adams says, he says first is a right to life. Now they put a priority on that, and today we say, well, right to life, that's not used the same way today that they used it then, because when we talk about right to life today, that is the abortion issue, but back then abortion was not an issue. Oh yes, it was. You see, the Scripture says there is nothing new under the sun, and the issues really don't change. The technology changes, but not the issues. As long as there have been pregnancies in the world, there have been people who did not want pregnancies, who wanted to terminate pregnancies, and you'll find that abortion was a discussed item in the founding era. As a matter of fact, we have books in our library of original documents on observations on abortion back in 1808 talking about it. You'll find that in early legislatures in the 1790s, they were dealing with the legislation on the right to life, on the abortion issue. So that literally, they understood back then that abortion was a bad deal, and your first guaranteed inalienable right is a right to life. And consider how many other founding fathers talked about the right to life. Take, for example, John Quincy Adams. Now, here's John Quincy Adams. He early involved in the American Revolution, was a diplomat. George Washington said he's the best diplomat we had. He becomes a president himself. And here's what John Quincy Adams said. He said, "The Declaration of Independence will tell you that its authors held for self-evident truth that the right to life is the first of the inalienable rights of man." There it is later. Now, he actually gave this speech 50 years after the Declaration. He said, "Now look, the guys who wrote the Declaration, my dad was one of them, and I know all those guys." He said, "They tell you that the right to life is the first self-evident truth of the inalienable rights of man." And he goes on, he says, "And to secure and not destroy that right, the right to life, governments are instituted among men." So he comes back and says the first inalienable right is the right to life, and governments are instituted to protect the right to life. Now, James Wilson, we already mentioned him as a signer of the Declaration Constitution, did the first legal book in America. This is what he said about the abortion issue. He said, "With consistency, beautiful and undeviating, human life from its commencement to its close is protected by the common law." He said, "In the contemplations of law, life begins when the infant is first able to stir in the womb. By the law, that life is protected." Now, very simply, he says, as soon as you know you're pregnant, as soon as you know there's life in the womb, that life is protected by law. Now, that's where the technology difference is. We can know that there's life in the womb much earlier today than what they knew back then, but the point was the same. As soon as you know there's a life there, it's protected by law from the commencement to the close. And as he says, in the contemplations of law, life begins when the infant is first able to stir in the womb. As soon as you know that there is a life there, it is absolutely protected.
Hey friends, Rick Green here to tell you about a great new opportunity to learn about the Constitution and our Founding Fathers. One of our great Founding Fathers, John Jay, he was an author of the Federalist Papers, and he was actually our very first Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. He said that every member of the state ought diligently to read and to study the Constitution. By knowing their rights, they'll sooner perceive when they're violated and be the better prepared to defend and assert them. Chief Justice Jay was exactly right, and never before have I seen so many people interested in doing exactly what he said. People all over America are wanting to read and study the Constitution. They want to know what the principles are that made our nation great. They are hungry to preserve our liberty, preserve our prosperity, and our limited government. They understand that American exceptionalism must purposefully be preserved for future generations. Well, we've done a program that now covers the entire Constitution. It's the Citizen Guide to our founding documents. We go through every clause, every article, every amendment. We get into the Founding Fathers. We talk about what they actually intended. We talk about what those words meant in 1787, not necessarily what they mean today, but what was the original intent. We cover subjects from whether or not a constitutional convention would be good, a new one, whether or not state nullification of a federal law is the right way to go. We talk about D.C. statehood, impeachment, the Electoral College, First Amendment freedom of religion, individual God-given rights versus group government-given rights, whether or not the Constitution is evolving and whether it should be the court or the people that would do that. All of these things, and it's right there in a class. And you can actually attend one of our live classes around the country by signing up at my website, rickgreen.com. Click on Constitutional Class. It'll list the cities where we're coming to, and if you'd like us to come to your city and we're not already headed that way, then shoot us an email and we'll try to get a class scheduled. You can also get the entire class on DVD and CD, so it's like you're in the room. You get to be a part of the questions and the answers. It's all right there on the DVD. Go to my website to find out more, rickgreen.com. So hope that you will dive in and study the Constitution. Let's do what Chief Justice John Jay suggested that we do. Let's read and study the Constitution, and here's your opportunity to do that. It's called the Citizen Guide to our founding documents.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
John Witherspoon, signer of the Declaration, the president of Princeton University, who trained so many founding fathers, he commented on the same fact. He said, a perfect right in a state of natural liberty is the right to life. He says, in America, we have even denied the power of life and death to parents. Hey, parents, you didn't create that life. God did. You don't have a right to take that life. Oh, it's my pregnancy, or I created the pregnancy, or I'm the father, I'm the mother. I can end that if I... No. God is the one who gave life, and we said in America, we don't even let parents take the life of that child or that unborn child. There's a right to life, and parents can't even violate that. So we recognize that life came from God, that it was a gift of God. It was not a gift of the parents. It came from God, and there's a lot of quotes on that. So when you look at what Sam Adams says and others said, the first of all the inalienable rights to be protected by government is the right to life. Now, when you look at the right to life issue, and if you apply that to anyone in government at any level, anywhere, they can be city dog catcher all the way to the President of the United States, it is really significant that if you find what their position is on the right to life, you have their entire view of government. Quite frankly, you'll find that if they are not willing to protect the right to life, and that's the first of all the inalienable rights, if they're not willing to say, God gave that right and it's off limits to government, and by the way, that's what limited government means, is it means government is limited from getting into certain areas. Life is one of those because God gave life, not government. But you'll find that if they are wrong on the life issues, whether that be euthanasia or abortion or anything else, if they're wrong on the life issues, you'll find that 99.9% of the time they're also going to be wrong on public religious expression issues. Oh, no. You don't have a God-given right to express your faith in public. While we don't need that stuff in the secular square, keep that religious expression out of public. Someone might see that. If they're wrong on the life issue, they'll nearly always be wrong on the religious expression issue. And if they're wrong on the life issue, they're nearly always going to be wrong on the right to keep and bear arms. They say, no, you don't have a right to defend yourself. You don't have the God-given right of self-protection, which the founders really go through a lot of biblical analysis of why that is a God-given right, and that's why they put it in the Bill of Rights. But if you're not willing to protect the right to life, you're not willing to protect the right of biblical self-defense, and if you're not willing to protect the right to life, you're going to get the Third Amendment wrong on the sanctity of the home, and you'll find that nearly everyone that's wrong on the abortion issue is also wrong on the traditional marriage issue. And I know marriage doesn't need to be just a man and a woman. Let's have some other combination. you'll find that those people are also wrong on the abortion issue. You'll find that if they're wrong on the abortion issue, they're also going to be wrong on the Fifth Amendment issue of the protection of private property. I mean, quite frankly, when they're wrong on one issue of inalienable right to life, they're going to be wrong on nearly every other inalienable right that's out there. And if they don't recognize those are God-given rights, and it's not the jurisdiction of government to interfere with those rights, then you're going to lose limited government, and you won't have good government. So our philosophy of American exceptionalism was very simple. We said, there is a God. He gives specific rights. The purpose of government is to protect the rights God's given. And by the way, here are many of the inalienable rights that he gave.
Well, that's all the time we have for today, folks. Thanks for joining us here on WallBuilders Live. You've been listening to David Barton on the topic of principles of limited government. And we're going to get the pick up where we left off today at the beginning of our program tomorrow. It'd actually be a three-part series, so it's going to take 3 programs to get this presentation in on principles of limited government. So for some reason you're going to miss the next couple of days, you can get them on our website at wallbuilderslive.com. Principles of Limited Government. You can also get the CD at our website, wallbuilders.com. If you'd like to just go ahead and order the CD and have the whole program there, you can do that as well. And I encourage you to visit the website and look through the articles. There's all kinds of great information right there, free to download, to help you begin to get educated, equipped, inspired, and involved in what's going on if you'd like to see a more limited government, and a government that's not only within the bounds of what it was intended to do, but it does the right things really well. So lots of good information there, wallbuilders.com, wallbuilderslive.com. I'll give you one more website if you want to get into what limited government means from a constitutional perspective. You want to get my class on the Constitution called The Citizen's Guide to America's Founding Documents, and you can get that at rickgreen.com. Really appreciate you being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow with more from David Barton on the principles of limited government. You've been listening to WallBuilders Live with David Barton and Rick Green.
We stand under